The idea was to try to bring that breadth of personalities and lifestyles from across the country to this little central location in New York and kind of give this Manhattan bubble a taste of what the rest of the country is like.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For 50 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Derek Fassbender.
Welcome, listeners. I'm Derek Fassbender, host of the B&H Photography Podcast.
And I'm Jill Waterman, the podcast senior creative producer.
And I'm Mike Weinstein, the show's technical producer and audio engineer.
That which unites us is far greater than what divides us. This heartfelt statement rings truer than ever amid the mercurial swings and uncertainties of our current era. The first four words of this sentence are subtitle and subtext for Path of Liberty, an immersive outdoor photo and media experience on view through fall 2025 at Freedom Plaza on Manhattan's East Side. In today's show, we'll catch up with two principals of this project's creative team, creative director Daniella Vale and director of photography Scott Beardslee, to learn more about this mammoth undertaking. Together with three other crew members, they spent 2 months traversing the country by van to interview a diverse group of everyday people, asking about their views on liberty, democracy, and what it means to be an American. Their voices, like the country itself, reflect a rich diversity of backgrounds, beliefs, and experiences. Yet across every conversation, one truth emerged. Being American is not defined by birthplace, religion, or heritage, but by a shared commitment to freedom, equality, and the pursuit of a better future. We'll introduce Daniella and Scott in a sec, but first we'd like to share a quick program update. As our regular listeners already know, we generally release a new podcast every other Thursday around 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Starting later this month, we'll be introducing a new podcast, the B&H Creators Green Room, to our feed during off weeks. Hosted by Deanna Testa, head of creators marketing at B&H, this new show will share stories about some of today's top creators, from how they started, to where they're headed, to how they picked their niche. Welcome to the stream, creators. We look forward to sharing this platform with you. Now back to today's show. Daniella Vale is a New York City-based photographer, film director, and producer. Her creative passions began early, influenced by her uncles in Pittsburgh's avant-garde film movement. While attending university in Tokyo, Daniella worked on photography and documentary projects. She later moved to Bollywood, where she collaborated with Shah Rukh Khan's Red Chillies Entertainment and Cannes-winning director Manish Jha. In New York, Daniella has worked for brands such as Vice, MTV, Google, and Prada, and with talent such as Alicia Keys, Deepak Chopra, and Lucy Liu. Her portfolio includes work in fashion, branded content, docuseries, and narrative films across various global locations. Career highlights include participating in the 2018 Cannes Film Festival Short Film Corner and being featured in Allure magazine for her directing work. And, of course, most recently, Daniella headed up the creative team for the immersive outdoor installation Path of Liberty, That Which Unites Us, which we're here to talk about today. Scott Beardslee began his career in photography, working as a first and second assistant. Yet his passion for narrative filmmaking soon inspired him to take a different career route, focusing on shooting films, commercials, and music videos. Upon graduation from San Francisco State University with a film theory and production degree, he pursued cinematography and later attended graduate school at the American Film Institute in Hollywood. Before he became serious about filmmaking himself, Scott worked as a gaffer for many established ASC cinematographers. Currently, Scott is a director of photography in IATSE Local 600, working on commercials, music videos, and television. Daniella Vale and Scott Beardslee, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
It is great to have you guys on, and I always love when it's a live exhibition that's actually in a place that I can go see. There's nothing worse than talking about something halfway around the world, so I can't go see it. So right here in New York, as we mentioned in the intro, you have spent the past year working with this team to create the content for this project, Path of Liberty, That Which Unites Us. And it's on view at Freedom Plaza on Manhattan's East Side since this May. Now, how did this project come about, Daniella? How did you get on the project? Whose idea was this?
Yeah, thank you. So I was connected to the Soloviev Foundation through another project that I was working on. And the CEO, Michael Hirschman, he had this space and they wanted to activate it. And he is very passionate about this topic and really wanted to create something that was focusing on the founding principles in our country. And so he wanted to take this space and do something to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. So we went through a few different iterations. I brought in the design team, C&G Partners LLC, and we eventually landed on this idea. And I'd spent years traveling around the country with Scott doing docuseries for a medical company. And I was always so inspired by how friendly and welcoming all these people were across the country in all these different places, living all these different lives. And I thought that that was something that was really missing from the discussion these days about just how kind and caring people across this nation are. So I pitched the idea of going around and talking to people across the country. And the idea was to try to bring that breadth of personalities and lifestyles from across the country to this little central location in New York and kind of give this Manhattan bubble a taste of what the rest of the country is like. And I thought it was a good moment for the 250th to reflect on these deeper ideas. So that's how it came about.
You know, it's funny. We talk with a lot of various photographers on this podcast, and I think it's just a conversation that comes up in general among photographers and anyone who goes out and touches grass every once in a while, that when you go out there and talk to people, that's one of the first things that pops into your head, whether you think about it or not, is like, wow, we really kind of want the same things in life. You know, we all want to be happy. We all want to get along. And when you go out and talk to people, it is so interesting and it's dynamic to see that, like, okay, when you get away from generalizations and just talk to everyday people, we are way more alike than we are different.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's something that seems so trite to say, but it's we keep forgetting it. And, you know, that's been the amazing experience. You know, Scott and I have traveled across the country through Europe, filming different people. And one of the things I love about working with him is he's so curious. And I'm also a very curious person. And when you approach people with that curiosity, it's exactly like you said. You're like, wow, we have so much in common. And we forget that, you know, or people get afraid of that, or people just get caught in these media narratives. So it was really important for us to explore that deeper and try to highlight that and remind people to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting that you and Scott, you have this relationship, you guys have worked together, and it was like one starting more based in still photography and moving to video, and one starting in video and now is doing a project that really heavily focuses on still photographs. And hearing you talk about the project and it's like what you wanted out of the still photos, it's funny because it's like you're a film person doing still photography. And, you know, with Scott, you started out the opposite. So can you talk a little bit about how you guys, is there more of an understanding because you guys both have been on both sides of the still versus motion thing?
Yeah, I think so. I'll let Scott speak a little bit to his still photo experience. I've always done very sort of documentary style still photography. A lot of that started when I was living in Tokyo. You know, I'm sure that your listeners will know Tokyo is one of the best places to get still cameras. Like they just have these shops that are like museums of impeccable old cameras. So that was where I really started practicing, like playing with film and shooting on celluloid. But I always had more of that documentary style practice. And Scott has worked with some of the top photographers, and he's done a lot of amazing fashion work. He can speak to his work with Raphael Mizuko. It was really helpful to have him on set because I kind of like to just find the moment, but this was a project where like we had to create the moment, and it was a challenge for me, but like Scott was really good at finding the light and the position. So it was really collaborative in that way.
I love that, finding the moment versus creating the moment.
Absolutely.
When you're in the field, you literally just have to work with what you have. And all those rules that you learn in school and these institutions, that just goes bye-bye. And you start thinking on your feet and you start developing your craft. And like what Daniella said, a fashion photographer kind of took me in the late 90s. And he brought me in as a cinematographer because he wasn't used to working with bigger crews. And he just showed me a lot how he worked in a single frame photography world. And we just kind of adapted our forces and taught me a lot how to break the rules. Because film sets are extremely intimidating, even for photographers, because photographers work on such a smaller scale. In the photochemical days, there's a lot more lights. We're shooting film, bigger crews. But he seemed to learn how to break all those rules. And I saw real quick how just people, they didn't feel comfortable with it. He was just breaking the rules like a writer does in the literature world. And I just saw this photographer create his own language. That saying, every poet is a thief. Just started to learn the rules and started breaking them and started developing my style and use what you have. And that's kind of like the documentary world. You got to pivot in a different direction. And I think Danielle is really good at that. And that's what we did on this project. And being curious and being open-minded and seeing it from a different perspective and letting people talk, I think is important. And being honestly curious. I try to be like this bird watcher, just try to capture as much as I can and give the handles for Daniela to take her post-production team to another level.
Now I see why Daniela is working with you, because everybody loves somebody who understands the idea of a role player. And in such an ego-driven world now, it's like you need a team to function as a team and everybody to kind of pull their weight. And sometimes you pull a little bit more and sometimes you pick up for another person. And sometimes you have to know when to step back. And I think you're right, Scott. In a project like this, you have to let the people talk and you have to create this avenue for authenticity. And I think in just talking to you guys for a couple minutes, I can see that where it's like you're disarming. And when you're going out and talking to people from various backgrounds all over the country, strangers, people you just met, you do have to kind of disarm people right from the jump. And it makes it so much easier to get to the heart of the story when people feel comfortable with you.
And like I said, Daniela, before this project, she used to do these projects traveling all over the world in Europe and South America. And she was curious with me too. She opened a path for me to explore. She always knew I shot a lot in Europe and she was doing all of these travel jobs. So she would bring me in because she knew that maybe bringing in another team player would help open up the creativity in a new place, because every place is different. When you shoot in Italy, when you shoot in Spain and France, it's just different. Crews work different, and you really want to maximize your creativity, and you don't know what you're going to get. In Europe, they have this line item. It says fixer. We don't really have that line item here in America, but a fixer is someone that makes it happen. He talks to the people. He gets you what you want. If you need more crew people or you want to shoot here, there's a fixer. And I think just allowing yourself to be a little open-minded with little street smarts and a little book smarts. And then you just kind of like let people do their thing and let the magic come out. And I think Danielle is really good at that. And you can jump in, Danielle.
How did the two of you first meet?
We met 15 years ago. I had met him through a mutual friend. I think I was coming back from Tokyo and I was moving back to the States and I wanted to get into film in New York. And through a mutual friend, I had met Scott and he had just finished filming a Beyonce music video, which he always hates that I bring up, but I think that's great. I'm like, he shot a Beyonce video. Scott, I think a lot of people will attest to this, is he's one of the most generous people when it comes to opening this world up and teaching and sharing his knowledge and sharing his skill set. And so in a lot of ways, he really took me under his wing and opened up the New York world to me. At that time, I really wanted to be a cinematographer. And he's like, oh, you want to be a cinematographer? Great. And he sent me to go work with the best non-union gaffer and to study lighting. And I worked as a third electric and I got my butt whooped.
Yeah, there's a fun story behind that. I could tell you my version.
Yeah, and it was great. And like I said, he just has this philosophy that he brings to the table that a lot of people have been lucky enough to experience, that's really based in a lot of deep passion and love of cinema and filmmaking and photography and lighting. And then luckily I got to learn a little bit about lighting, which has just been incredibly helpful, especially once I moved on to like directing and producing. Having that knowledge base helps me because I can communicate with crews. Like you said, sometimes when I'm shooting in other places, a lot of times the crews kind of eye you up. They're like, who's this chick? And, you have a little bit of language about, let me get some neg fill here and give some lighting tips, and you get the crew's respect. So it's been really helpful. And yeah, and then the rest is history. I don't know, Scott, what's your version of that?
I mean, let's just start like New York City is the greatest city in the world, and it allows people to connect and rub. And I think a friend of a friend happened to meet Danielle, and she's like, came off a little strong. She was younger back then. And I'm a director. And I was like, okay, great. I'm going to call you one day. And lo and behold, I called her at 5 a.m. in the morning. I go, here's your opportunity. This is one of the biggest non-union lighting crews in New York City. The best of the best. They need an extra person. Do you want to work? I remember the phone went just silent for a second. She said, absolutely. She showed up at like 6:30 and she had a nice little run with some of the best lighting guys in New York City. She jumped in as an electric and she got that hands-on knowledge. And a lot of it's like kind of being in the right place at the right time and just saying, yes, I'll go and show up and then let it go from there. Like the documentary world, like just show up and just start watching and you're going to find something.
And the rest.
And the rest is history.
Is history.
Yeah. So, and then we just became friends and she started directing and I loved her ideas. She always has this different perspective on things. I think that's what artists do. They take a topic and provide a different light for it that people can look at and maybe be inspired by it.
How did you guys build the rest of the crew? I mean, it's a small crew, right? You guys are traveling the country. And then, we'll get into having another crew that's not even with you, like an offsite crew. Can you talk a little bit about that direct crew that you travel in the country with and who's on that crew? How are you putting that crew together? What's everybody's responsibility there?
I'll let Scott take that one. He built the crew that we traveled with.
Again, you have a director that supports me and backs me, which is really important because if you don't have someone that questions everything, you're not going to get anywhere. So she says, build the crew. Let's talk about it. So, and I made some phone calls. First thing I talked to is a lot of people that shoot documentaries. I've shot a lot of documentaries, but my passion is more narrative and commercial. Because documentaries kind of take a part of you. It puts you on the road. You're away from friends, family, pets. It's a commitment. You can't have one foot in the door, one foot out. So I made my phone calls. And the thing that I was told is, Scott, you're not just going to be DPing. You're going to be on the road. It's a different beast. It's like when you eat, you got to look at a map. You got to think about the next day, the day after, and look at the weather. There's a lot of elements going on, even safety. And in a time where we were traveling the country, there's a lot going on during the election, and we don't know. We're just kind of like driving into this storm. So I picked a crew where personality is important. You have to have a sense of technical knowledge for sure, because we're doing sound and camera, and be able to adapt.
How much vibe check is there? I mean, you got to bring people who you can get along with. Right?
100%.
Is that like 80%? Like, hey, if you can.
Oh, Daniel jumping in. You got to have that Gen Zer with the right Spotify playlist. Those people love the Gen Xers, so they're all playing Daniella's hits and my hits. So
most important person on the crew.
Yeah, that playlist is very important. What else, Daniella? Jump in here.
Because it was such a small crew and it was so like all hands on deck, we needed a lot of people that could switch roles a little bit. So we did have a great AC with us, Grant. And he also was drone operating, and he was amazing because he would be up at 4 a.m. before call time droning. I mean, the guy was just unstoppable. And you'll see in the Central Plaza piece where all that amazing drone footage ended up. So it was really nice to have somebody like that was just like so locked in, as the kids say.
Yep.
That was another great thing. We learned a lot of Gen Z terminology. Like
I learned a lot. Yeah.
How to communicate with all age groups.
Yeah. And then we also had Phil Rudinsky, who is another really amazing person that produces, and he ran our sound. And so he's just like a really smart fellow. We also had Mina, who was our driver and also had to jump in and do some lighting. And, it's really important to say all three of those guys are people that Scott's been training. Phil, we met as a PA on a Fall Out Boy video. And again, like Scott was super generous and opened up the knowledge to him and shared with him. And he just was somebody that took it and ran and has been producing his own projects now. it was really great to just have a super smart team and everybody was all in. I mean, that's the other thing. It takes everybody being really passionate because it is long days and it's exhausting. And you're around these people and you're in a different hotel every night. And our first day filming was Maine, and I think it was 8 degrees. Like it was not
Wow.
easy conditions. You know, the weather was a real challenge. And so people that were in it and not complaining and solution oriented. And it was great. It was a really special time.
How much of the pre-production was nailed down as far as, you know, obviously you got to work on the fly. We got that out of the way early, but was it like, hey, my uncle knows somebody in Sioux City. We're going to head there and interview this person? Or as far as like the interactions with the people and meeting people, was there times where it was just like you meet somebody along the way and you're like, wow, this person would be great for the project. Let's throw them in.
Yeah. On the ground in New York, we had my producer, Hannah Gregg, and then our story producer, Jessica Pilot. My producers are really doing a lot of research on their end. And actually, one of our subjects, Jane, was a cousin of my producer, but she was fascinating. And she's a farmer in North Carolina. So it was really great to go see her. But yeah, a lot of it was just research from my producer's end. And then it was a balance of finding interesting people. We're like, oh, that person just seems interesting. Let's go talk to them versus like, oh, we have this sort of role we want to fill. Like we're looking for firemen. So go find this fireman. I mean, we basically signed the contract middle of October and we're on the road by the end of October. So no time for pre-production. It was like, go, because we knew we had to get out and be out there and try to beat the weather. So we had to really just jump in before things were as planned out as would have been ideal. But thanks to the amazing team, it all worked. So we hired Jessica Pilot as the story producer, and she was really the person that kind of got the talent for us. So Hannah, Gregg, and I sat and we sort of mapped out our route. And then the idea was to try to find people along that route. And so we're like, okay, we're going to go to Maine. What's in Maine? Lobster fisher people. And there was a balance of trying to find these like quintessential American subcultures and then also being open to like what we find. And so on our second day, we had somebody canceled. And again, this is where Scott really shines. So the crew, we decided, okay, let's go find a different spot and we'll just sit and have lunch. And then we're sitting having lunch. And then Scott starts talking to people. And then we wound up running into this really amazing subject, Earl Bigelow in Maine, who was this musician. And so we did an on-the-fly interview with him. But in the end, I found the people that we planned out, they were a little bit more prepared.
Interesting. I was going to ask you what that looked like on the flip side. It's always easier in retrospect to look back. But did you hit the mark that you wanted to hit? Did you exceed? Where did you come in terms of what you had in your mind going into it and with what you finally came up with the interactions you had?
You know, we had a little bit of an outline of the story we wanted to tell. And there were certain people and topics that I really wanted to hit. And I was like, oh, great, this person will definitely hit the mark on this topic. And I just didn't get what I wanted with those things. You know, especially like there was this idea of service. So I wanted to talk to some service people and explore that. And yeah, I just got a different perspective. And that's a skill set, is learning to roll with when things go not how you planned and being open to that. And luckily, like even with my narrative films, I always tend to make 3 films. There's like the film I write, the film I shoot, and then usually I like totally rearrange everything and make a totally different film in the edit. So I've gotten pretty accustomed to like that non-attachment and rolling with things. That's where the magic happens too, you know. And like I said, that's where Scott's really good of like finding that magic in the moment, because I think we really were good at tag teaming in that sense, because I was really in touch with the New York crew of Hannah and Jessica and making sure that we had a plan and trying to build out that part of the structure. And Scott was really good with like sort of being able to be present in the moment and find the magic wherever we were. I mean, I keep saying I can't believe what an amazing team this was that I got to work with. It was really like a highlight of my career.
That's an interesting concept, the 3 movies, you know, the one you wrote or intended to. And I want to dig in on that a little bit more, because I think that's such an interesting idea that a lot of people don't think about. It's like when an artist paints a picture, whether it's a mural, a painting, you sketch it out and you paint it. And with film and even photography projects to a certain extent, it doesn't go that way. There's the cutting room floor where a lot of stuff gets left and the narrative can change. And especially on a documentary project, you might not get eye for eye the narrative that you set out to get, or you get thrown curveballs. How much of a struggle is it as a creative, Daniella? It's like you go in with a certain idea and you have to pivot, and then your idea changes as you're out there, traveling across the country. Your idea is going to change as you're meeting people, the further you get along in the project. And then it changes again when you go into the editing, and you're like, you might have something you really love and you have to leave it on the cutting room floor because it doesn't fit, or something that, you went one direction and you're like, well, how do I get back to the point I wanted to get to? How do you approach that as an artist in, I guess, letting go of things that you love and learning to adapt on the fly?
I mean, it's not just a practice as an artist, it's a practice as a human being at this point, right? Like
Totally,
it's just,
totally.
I have a spiritual practice that I've been practicing. And I think it really does come down to like how you develop yourself as a human, spiritual being, and then applying that to the art as opposed to vice versa. So that's where I kind of have gotten that from.
I want to come back to this road trip before we take a break. And there had to have been something memorable, wild, crazy, disastrous. Is there any one story that sticks out, or is there 100,000 stories?
I mean, go ahead, Danielle.
No, go ahead, Scott. You go.
Yeah.
She's like, let me see where he goes.
I might be going back to like what Daniela was saying about the concept, because America's a big place. And Daniela and I always talked about this because we've traveled across America before. And one thing I've been told and I've heard, America, to see the beauty, you got to go on the back roads. And you really have to search for those people, because there are good people in America. And the most beautiful spots aren't on the commercial routes. If you want to see the Rio Grande, if you want to see the Grand Canyon, if you want to see all these amazing places in America, it is on the back roads. And the back roads are the people of America at the end of the day. I know there's this city life, but this place, there's all these corners and different parts of the US that are just beautiful. And you really got to just explore that and be curious about that. And we talked about this, and I think going back to that concept, you just got to be open-minded to what you're going to get. And it's hard because sometimes you're not really getting what you thought you're going to get, but I guarantee you'll be shooting something beautiful.
Were you surprised, or did anything strike you as counterintuitive about some of these conversations that you had along the way?
That's a good question.
Because, we are in this particular, zeitgeist or vibe that we can sort of feel. And then there's this project which sort of purports to represent a different story, which is a more sort of unifying one. And perhaps, the reality is a little more nuanced.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like, we were on the road during the week of the election and talking to people, everybody was freaking out for one reason or another. Certain people were feeling really upset. And I was feeling more hopeful than ever because we were talking to these people that everywhere we went, everyone was doing like their little work in their neck of the woods to really make a difference. And I guess what was surprising to me was just across the country, talking to all these different kind of people. And like I said, like we lobster fishermen in Maine and farmers and people that worked in museums and people living in the desert versus people living in like coastal cities, or despite all of these different lifestyles and viewpoints and stuff, there were these common themes that came across. And it really was that like across the board, when I asked people, what does being American? They said, it means freedom, freedom to be myself, freedom to let other people be themselves, freedom to respect those different ways of life, like justice, like people really wanted equality for everyone. Of course we can argue about how to like achieve that or what that means, but like across the board, these same themes kept coming across. And it was so hopeful and so inspiring at a time when, if you listen to the mainstream media, everything seems so hectic and crazy, but that's just not the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is people are kind and caring, and we do all want these same things. And they really do revolve around this idea of freedom and liberty and equality and justice. Yeah, that was really inspiring.
And that is a perfect sentiment to take us to break on. One of Hope, it's like, on the Path of Liberty About page, it mentions that with every generation we get closer to this idea that America was built on, that all men are created equal. And I kind of love that because it's been a long, arduous journey. But this project to me represents hope. And hearing you say these words, Daniella, about, these interactions that you've had, and when everybody's just completely on the fritz, you're looking at it as like hopeful. And I think that is such a great sentiment to take into break. So we are going to do just that. If you are standing up, stretch, shake it out. If you're already standing, have a seat, relax. When we come back, we'll get into the nitty gritty of the gear and production details for Path of Liberty, here talking with Daniella Vale and Scott Beardslee. We'll be back in a few.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes on your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website and join our B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
And we are back with Daniella Vale and Scott Beardslee talking about the immersive outdoor media experience, Path of Liberty, that is now on view this summer in Midtown Manhattan. Now, over the break, we were talking about this idea of hope and the Declaration of Independence and all that. And Scott, you had started a train of thought there. Let's get this back on the record. So, Scott, I'm going to kick it over to you and pick up where we were talking during the break.
Yeah, I was just saying that, like, America, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We all want to be happy. And I just remember this one person we interviewed. She literally started from scratch, nothing, when she came to this country. And now she has an amazing restaurant business. And when Danielle was asking a few questions, she was like, sometimes I think the Americans have too much freedom, like as a joke. We do get comfortable. But even though we're comfortable, we have to still appreciate a hot shower every day. You cherish it, because even go to Europe, you have like 2 minutes of hot shower, people don't recognize that. Here is like, we're a little spoiled. So we just got to keep that in check.
I think that's such a great point where it's like, there's a difference between freedom and then taking advantage of the freedom. And we get to a point of greed and we lose this sense of community. How much sense of community did you guys see? And was there anything in terms of like big city versus small town America that you can kind of correlate these ideas with?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, like I said, we were very lucky. The first day that we went filming, we spoke to this organization called Lift All Boats for people in Maine. I guess like getting the lobster license, it's like very hard to get. And so there's this program that actually takes youth that normally wouldn't have access to going out on the water, which is such a quintessential part of the Maine culture, and gives them this lobster apprenticeship program. And, it was just so nice to see people really giving back. I mean, I think that is when us as Americans are at our best, when we can recognize just like how abundant and how lucky and how wealthy, and I don't just mean monetarily wealthy, but just this wealth of opportunity that we have been granted. And when people can really appreciate that and then give back. And that's like another thing that I think is really quintessentially American. I've spent a lot of time living outside of the country. I've traveled a lot out of the country. And that isn't across the board, happening in other places. And so I think that being able to give back and foster a sense of community is key. The city's tough because obviously when you're in smaller communities, you're seeing your neighbors all the time. It's very different when you're living in a city, that things are much more transient, and also just we're able to kind of use technology to replace a lot of community. You used to have to like build friendships and get people to help you move. Now you just like, there's an app for it. You don't even have to like make contact with them. So that is such an important part of America, is like all these small towns. I mean, honestly, it's been a bit sad because in the time that I've been traveling, even from whenever I was little, you see these small towns are starting to wither away. And it's sad because I think that a lot of those small communities is where we get all these interesting cultural elements too of America. There's so many different subcultures in America. And I think that that's something that's really interesting to explore. You could spend decades exploring all of those things.
Daniella, how long did you live in Japan?
4 years.
Are there any big takeaways from, the differences between Americans and Japanese, for instance?
Japan is a very cohesive culture. Something that we have in America, it's funny because it's like our greatest strength, and then it also becomes our greatest downfall, which is hyper-individualism that we have in America, which is great because if you have an idea or if you have something that makes you different, you can come here and you can thrive. In Japan, you do not want to be different. They have this in Scandinavian countries too. They call it tall poppy syndrome. standing out from the crowd is seen as being something bad. And it's really about you put the group over your individual self in those kind of societies. Creates a really nice society. It's very safe. You can drop an envelope of $1,000 and people will pick it up and chase you down the street to give it to you in Tokyo. That's not happening in New York.
Right.
At the time when I was living in Tokyo, it was very hard for me to adapt. And then I went and lived in Bollywood and was working in India. And after I had that experience, I had a newfound appreciation. Japan just works. It's like living in Disney World. It's so clean and everything is just on time and all that. And you see like that works because everybody's operating from the same standards and values. There's a lot of beauty to that culture.
Sure.
America is, like I said, it's our greatest strength is our greatest downfall. It comes at a price. And a lot of times the price is like community, and people all the time in the United States are sacrificing family, community, friendships for careers. There's no one thing that's better than the other. I think it's just what works for you.
And it sounds like, you got the contract and you started work like, 2 weeks later?
Yeah, we were in development. So we were kind of like developing it and stuff, but we got the final sign off. And then 2 weeks later, we're on the road.
I'm wondering, in terms of shaping the actual core themes, did you have a lot of autonomy? Or any autonomy, I should say?
It was really great. Working with Michael Hirschman, the CEO of Soloviv, his directive was to celebrate the 250th, and he wanted it to be nonpartisan and to focus on these foundational ideals and principles. So it was really about creating this space of hope. And he's very patriotic. And, it's funny because we've been finding a lot of pushback. I think right now is a tough time for people. I think they say people feel the least patriotic they've ever felt. And Michael, he's really passionate about America. I think so often people think that comes from a place of ignorance. And it's something that I also personally had to come to. We're raised to be very critical of America. And like I said, I think that's a good thing in a lot of ways because it pushes us to become better and better. But I've also spent a lot of time living in other places, and there's a lot to be grateful for and appreciative of. And I think that that's something that's been lost in the conversation, or it becomes, if you are sort of focusing on the positives of America, or you're at all saying you're patriotic, it has a different connotation than what it used to be. So I keep saying with this, I'm trying to rebrand patriotism right now because...
that word is loaded, or at least more than it used to be.
Well, it has become.
And, what does being patriotic mean to you now, and how maybe has working on this project have you come to a different understanding of what that means?
These themes started emerging: equality, justice, freedom. And when you really focus on what that means, it gave me such an appreciation for what this country is. It is a place that you can be yourself. Like I said, that's not the case in other places. There's a lot of countries where if you want to express yourself or be yourself, it's not welcomed, especially in New York City. I mean, you just, you could sit on a corner in New York City and you see everybody as being the most extreme versions of themselves. And there's a great beauty to that. For me, I had to get over a lot of this kind of bias, which is that, if you're patriotic, there's just a negative connotation with it these days. And I really came to understand, we all live in this country, it's like being on a plane and wanting the plane to crash. We're all in this together, and we all need this to work for all of us. And there's nothing wrong or bad about loving your country. And I think a lot of it really starts with loving your fellow country men and women and all of the rest. America's a very challenging country because we don't have this sort of common ancestry the way a lot of other places do that ties us together. And so we are a country that is based on these ideals, and it's those ideals that tie us together. And it's funny to me because, like I said, everybody thinks they're so different, but when I ask everybody this question, they all have the same answer. So even though we're focusing on all these differences, there's so much more underlying that we actually have in common. And I think a lot of times people don't realize how American they are until they leave the country. It's like everyone always says, I'm not American, I'm a New Yorker. And it's like, okay, well, go hang out with a bunch of Euros and then you're going to come across pretty American still, So, we need to be able to have pride in what that means. And if we're feeling like we're not living up to it, it doesn't mean that you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's more about redirecting and finding that true north and living out those principles.
I love the entire sentiment behind that. And it's funny because it's like I sit there sometimes and I'm like, I feel like I'm the only person that feels that way, where it's like, no, there's a lot of individual people. We aren't the decisions our government makes. We aren't what's in European press about our country. And it's funny because everything is so generalized now, where it's like America did this and everything is by the country. And the country isn't the sum of its parts necessarily. It's a bunch of, tens of millions of individuals that, they function differently, they feel differently, and we're all generalized into one. And I think that's one of the real beauties of this project, is it's shining individual lights and getting away from that generalization. So I think that's beautiful. I want to segue a little bit, because I could talk about that for hours, into gear. I mean, we're B&H, we love gear, but I'm interested in what kind of kit you guys were traveling with, how that affected, going into places. I know street photographers carry a small camera. It's not intimidating. Film crews bring out, 30 by 60 foot scrims. What were you guys traveling with? How did that affect the scope of the project?
I'm going to let Scott answer the rest of that, but I have to do my little, funny enough, for my still photo camera, I definitely went on a nice B&H run right before.
Job security for us.
And like, how fun is that too, whenever you get to go to B&H and just like buy a ton of gear up. For my still camera, I grabbed a Fujifilm X-T50. I was really, really happy with this because, like I said, for my still photography, I'm accustomed to shooting on film. Digital still photography is so not my wheelhouse. And this Fujifilm X-T50, and then I got 2 Voigtlander lenses, the 23 millimeter, because that was going to be about a 35 millimeter equivalent, and a 35 millimeter, which was about a 50 millimeter equivalent, because with the design team, we had this concept for how the still photos should have this uniform feel to them while the subjects and landscapes change. And I absolutely loved having this camera, especially those vintage Voigtlander lenses have that nice manual focus feel. It felt like I was shooting with film, but then we had these beautiful high megapixel photos that we got to blow up to 20 foot by 15 foot. So it was great.
I'm biased. I shoot Fujifilm too, so I'm just going to leave it there. I'm biased. I approve of this message.
I've always loved Fuji. It's just always been one of my favorite camera companies.
And Scott, what about you? What does documentary filmmaking mean in 2025?
There's a lot of moving parts in that. First of all, I got a Bluetti battery charger, so we can always just charge on the fly in the Sprinter. So for my 2 interview cameras, I use the Red Komodo 6, the one that shoots 6K, 5K, or 4K. And we end up shooting 6K on some shots. So on our wide, if we wanted to push in a little bit, we'd shoot 6K. And then on the close, we'd shoot 4K. Because media can just get out of hand real quick, real fast. And that's a whole nother thing too. So we're trying to like scale down how much gigabytes we shoot per day, because we're doing like a lot, maybe a terabyte a day. And then for my time lapse, I used a Sony A1. I use cinema lenses with the PL adapter, Sony E to PL. And for the cinema stills, I use the Nisi lenses, which are great, by the way. They're very lightweight. They're small. They cover 6K. All the diameters of the filter is 77. So I can have one uniform filter case that all of my filters fit, because I'm NDing quite a bit, especially in time lapse. That had to be a system. And I think there was one lens I had to do a step up or a step down, and that was it. For the drone, I have a Mavic Pro 3, but I would have Grant do a lot of the flying. Danielle and I would just give instructions. There's a system. You don't want to be in the drone's ear for safety. Right. You kind of have to step back and let him do his thing. Or if it's a dual system, you could be on comm and just give basic, simple instructions, because there's a lot going on.
And what lenses were you using with the Red?
With the Red, 35, 50, 85, and we had an 18. But our workhorse lenses were the 35 and the 50.
Yeah.
And then we had the Ronin RS Pro, and that allowed us to put right at 9 pounds, because I think it does 10.5 pounds, to do our kind of steady cam shots.
That's a gimbal?
Yeah. So Danielle and I came up with the concept of circling each talent. and we do a full circle. Looks great. You know, the gladiator shot.
Yeah. That's exactly what
So Danielle and I would talk about, this is what we need to get for each, this, that. Then we'd leave room to get some other stuff. But that's pretty much our gear.
Did you have lights?
We did have lights. Sky panel, S30. I used Bounce, and then a couple LEDs. Titans.
What are those?
Titan Asteras. They're the snobbish light of the film industry. They run on battery power. You can put them on a runtime. Like, I need an hour of a runtime, and you program an hour, and you just jump on the app and you say, I need the highest output for 2 hours. Boom, done. And they put out a lot, and it's super soft. And with the sky panel, I would put like a top edge, little hair light, and then a key light, and then really kind of using background. And we would try to shoot that area right time of day, because that's everything. You know, shooting in the morning or at dusk, just getting the light right. That's a lot of it. It's anticipating where the light's going to be and adapting to that. That's very important.
And by the way, what was the percentage of interior, exterior?
For the interviews, we would shoot those interior as much as possible. And then the still photos we tried to get outside. One of the things that we added on the second leg was a Joker light, which is my favorite light to work with. And I'm like kicking myself that we didn't have it the whole time. For me, especially, I love shooting stills with a Joker.
Describe for our audience, what do you like about a Joker and what does it do?
It's just like the quality of light. It's one of those lights.
It's a metal halide, HMI. It just, it pushes a lot of light.
You can feel that light.
You could really feel, I mean, the thing is, like, LED is getting there, but it's not quite. So when you put up like a 400 or an 800 Joker, it just pops. And Daniella's still shots were very wide, so we could put the light farther back. And a nice little technique, when you put the medium lens in, the outer element of that medium lens, there's a sweet spot to it. And that's just knowing the lights and kind of feathering those tools into the right spot. It looks like a car headlight. It's a medium lens. And if where you're focusing the light, use that edge part of the beam, it looks beautiful.
Yeah, it has nice fall off, the Joker HMI does. And it has that imperfection. You know, the LED is just like this perfect flat, everything's even wall of light. And that Joker gives a shape to the light that to me just feels much more natural. What I always love is like that very natural sort of lighting style that doesn't feel like it's lit. It feels like it's sunlight.
There's a beauty in that light.
Mm-hmm.
I love hearing this.
Typically, how much time would you spend with the interview subjects?
So it's funny because I'd always be like, okay, this will be a quick 30-minute interview.
So yeah, Danielle would say this is going to be quick. And then literally it's between an hour and 2 hours, somewhere in there.
Yeah, minimum hour, usually hour and a half.
Yes.
What's the percentage of what you're getting out of that? Is it just a lot of small talk, or is it related to what you're talking about for the project?
People are fascinating. You know, you start talking to people, and I love talking. I can keep it going. In the beginning, I was a little bit more nervous, so there was usually more small talk involved. And then by the end of the project, I was pretty good at like jumping in, and people were pretty comfortable jumping right into these topics. These were big topics we were dealing with, so people could really talk, and it was fascinating. You know, I wasn't going to cut them off.
And as for the interviews, was it standard boilerplate questions? Was it more authentic conversation? Did you have any preference over what you thought you might need going into post-production?
Depending on the person, you know, a lot of times what I'll do in interviews is while the crew is setting up the interview and the lights, I'll kind of start small talking people to just get a feel for them. So that way, once we start rolling, they're comfortable. And then we had a lot of times the first part of the interview was kind of them telling their personal stories. And then I would end the interview with saying, like, we have these same 5 questions we're asking everybody. And that's where I had a set of questions that I went around and I asked everybody. And that was nice because, like I said, we got to have these sort of comparative answers. So it was a mix of personal story and this set questions. And those set questions were dealing with these greater ideals. You know, what does being American mean to you? What are the founding principles? What do you see for the future of America? And different versions of that.
Mm-hmm. And how did you structure it in terms of filming the video, doing the stills? Was there always one before the other?
Usually we would do the interviews first and then do the stills afterwards, but sometimes we'd have to switch that up because, like Scott was saying, if the lighting was amazing and it was like this moment, we'd be like, all right, let's go grab the stills first. I found for me personally, I like doing the stills after the interviews because I kind of got to know them and they felt more comfortable with me. So it was easier to do the stills. None of these people were professional actors or models or anything. So as you know, a lot of people can be kind of uncomfortable when you're like taking a photo of them. They're like, how do I pose? What do I do? So I found that doing the interview with them made them just more comfortable for the stills.
And what kind of direction? Do you go minimal direction, or was there anything you wanted out of them to show in the images?
What do you think, Scott? I tend to be pretty minimal. Like I said, I like to be naturalistic, although that's something that I've really learned on this project. And it's something that Scott's always said is to make it look natural, you have to still like produce it. There's so much work that goes into getting something.
Yeah, you got to fight for that shot. It's not going to be like how you envisioned it. I mean, I remember when we were in Chicago, the sun was coming down and it just hit that building, and the bounce of the sun bouncing off glass just gave this amazing highlight to the talent. It's just being open-minded and looking around what you have. And again, working with what you have on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
It always gets kind of rush. So you have to like try not to get ahead of it. Don't get ahead of photography or cinematography. Just kind of step back and let things happen, because everyone's just talking too much, and you just got to let things happen. You might get an idea for letting something happen for a better idea. That's where you want to be. You can't really teach that. You really have to be in the trench and figure it out.
That's experience talking.
Yeah.
I mean, knowing, especially a large portion of this is storytelling. As much as the visual and the audio, it's about a story. People love a story, and there is an art to storytelling. And a lot of that does involve listening and letting the moment kind of take shape on its own in a certain sense. You can be a traffic cop. I always like to think of it as like you're directing the flow of traffic. And a good traffic cop knows when to step out of the way and let traffic proceed.
Yeah. And also, too, with the whole social media, kids and people are a lot smarter. They know what's fake. That's why they like watching people jump out of a car, because that's real and it's silly. It's like, you know what I'm saying? They're trying to grab real. So if you're getting ahead of it and you're forcing things, they're not going to be engaged. They're going to tune out. And to catch that attention, it's evolving. People are getting smarter visually now, I think. Most people prefer to text versus making a phone call these days, you know?
Yeah.
And you're like, how do you use your brain to try to communicate with two thumbs? What's the bandwidth between your brain and two thumbs? That's better. It's like using a high-end computer and a small hard drive. It doesn't make sense. So you just got to be aware of those things. Like all those elements is all packaged into one. You have to just be aware of it and not get ahead of it and take a step back.
Does that make it easier on a creative project? Because now everybody's so used to cameras. Everybody is constantly photographing themselves, the world around them. Is it easier to connect with people and to get what you want visually?
Yeah, interesting. Like, I never even thought about that, actually. Scott, have you noticed any trends?
A little Hollywood that exists in everyone, I think, these days. You know, they want to be heard. Mr. Beast has a huge show on
Correct.
Netflix. I mean, that is where it's going. That's the celebrity of today, almost. In like 10 years, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a bunch of
Everyone's
Mr.
a
Beast.
podcast.
Yeah, it's going to be a bunch of
But
Mr.
not
Beast.
really.
You know, so I'm just seeing it happen in real time. You know,
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that actually like bears down to like a ground level reality that you might have noticed when you're doing the interviews, where like 10 years ago, they just weren't as verbally dexterous or communicative, whereas these are Gen Zers maybe, are just more comfortable in that medium and can express themselves.
Sometimes people are more apprehensive because they know everything's out there.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah,
going to
it's
say.
true.
That's what I felt a lot of times was I think especially like dealing with the subject matter, people felt very cautious at first. And especially when you say, oh, we're doing an interview, there's a lot of apprehension. You know, the only way to combat that is to like show up authentically with the person and help them to understand that if you're vulnerable with them, then they can be vulnerable with you, and to be respectful. And I would always say before interviews, if there's anything you say that you're not comfortable with, even if you think about it, like afterwards, let me know, you know, like my goal here is to make you feel comfortable and to make you proud of what you're saying. There was never an intention of doing any kind of got you journalism with this project.
And I think that does put people at ease. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Danielle, about this new idea of being patriotic, where we also live in a world now where people lose their jobs. People get doxxed
Yeah.
for saying not even the wrong thing, for just saying something that is contrary to what somebody else might believe. And it's a dangerous, slippery slope that makes it a really interesting dynamic as far as documentary is concerned going forward.
I think it can always be tempting as a creator. You get these things, this will be controversial, this will cause a flame, this will get me attention. But I think that just comes with maturity. You understand, like, it's not worth that short fix when, especially if you're going to be misrepresenting somebody's viewpoint or something. That was like the last thing I wanted to do. Because obviously with editing, we have to cut out the uhs and the ums, and you want to make people sound as good as possible, but reflect the reality. And so it was very important to me too, with the edits and the editors, that we were really staying true to what people were saying, and especially in this project, because this was a directive from Michael Hirschman. He said, I don't want to shy away from like some of the harder truths of this country. And it would be daft to have a conversation about 250 years of American history without touching on this country was founded on this idea of equality. And yet that is not necessarily what our history was. We had a lot of different groups that were oppressed. And to me, what really came through that was interesting that I'd never thought about before is that even though we had this super high idea of all men being created equal, it's not an easy concept to execute. It's not for lack of trying. It's that is actually really hard to achieve.
Yeah, that's the North Star, I guess, but that's sort of like a faraway utopia, perhaps, but always worth moving towards.
That was an important thing too, is like we have to be realistic about what that means in a way, so that we are not in this constant like self-flagellation as a country, that we can actually recognize the growth and progress that we've made and not say just because it's not perfect doesn't mean you should throw everything out. That it's in that striving, the fact that we even value that as a concept, that in itself is something special and to be focused on.
Danielle, I want to talk about the actual exhibit. We talked about everything leading up, the actual exhibit. And I want to start with talking about just what you were speaking with and making people comfortable and this sense of authenticity in where is this interview going? How is my image and my likeness going to be used? Have you heard feedback from the people who are part of the project about how everything came together?
Oh my God, it was so special. We had the opening, and a lot of the subjects came to New York to see their photo for the first time and to see themselves in the videos. And for some of the subjects, it was their first time in New York City. So imagine you've never even been to New York City, and then you show up and there's your photo 20 feet tall in the middle of Manhattan. So it was just such a special night to see all the different subjects come together. And it was also really cool. We had a breakfast in the morning for the subjects, because even though I and the crew had met all of them, they hadn't met each other. And it was really nice to get them to kind of intermix and intermingle. And yeah, people were just really proud to be part of the project. They felt really proud to see their hometowns represented in Manhattan. I think that was another important element, is it wasn't just about the people, it was about showing these different places as well and bringing that to Manhattan. I mean, I think that that's one of the coolest things about this project, is you can go and stand in front of this video screen that is showing you the sun rising on Monument Valley. It used to be like you got to do summer vacation and go to all the national parks, but we sort of brought the national parks to Manhattan. You can't make it on holiday for recession reasons.
Yeah, thank you. I'm stuck here, so thank you.
Yeah, we brought the summer vacation to you. People have been really, really happy and really proud. And we got a lot of really nice local press coverage as well for different subjects. So it's been really special. It's like they're their own hometown heroes and their own little representatives of their corners of America. And for them to be in the middle of Manhattan was huge. And a lot of people in the towns they came from were really happy to see that representation there.
Mm-hmm. How much of the post-production were you guys involved with? I mean, there's obviously a ton of pre-production to make a project like this happen, but with it being such a huge and immersive experience, this isn't just like an exhibit where it's printing and hanging frames. There's a lot that is involved in going into an experience like this. Were you guys very hands-on with that aspect as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kept saying, I'm like, this is like we are doing 3 projects at once. The still photos in themselves are a project. The documentary pieces in themselves are a project. And then that immersive 8-screen installation is in itself a project. So it was absolutely insane to be doing all of them together at once. So for the still photos, I worked with LTI, and I had an amazing editor, Moss, who helped me with doing all the photo edits. And then for the documentary pieces, I had a team of 2 editors, Oliver Noble and Ben Craw. Before we even set off, we knew that we had this setup of 30 still photo structures. We knew that we had this 8-screen installation piece, and we knew that we had these 3 screens that we wanted to sort of treat like a 3-act structure in the story of America. So I worked very closely with my 2 editors, and then also, like I said, Hannah Gregg, my producer, and Jessica Pilot, my story producer. They were also very important and helpful in shaping the story. So we would get these transcripts of these interviews. I mean, it's over 80 hours of interview footage, and we had to all watch them down. And then we would kind of like put together paper edits. One editor was in Connecticut and the other editor was in Brooklyn. So especially towards the end, the one from Connecticut would come down from the weekend and we would just do these like struggle sessions until like midnight working, and we had all of us sitting around in a room and there was a lot of back and forth. I was really lucky because I feel like we had a lot of diversity of opinions and viewpoints on the team as well. So it was really nice to have that back and forth. I'd be like, I want this person in. They're like, no, we don't need that. Like, so it was a lot of going back and forth. But like, to me, that's what made it this optimal piece. And to bring it back to this idea of democracy, I think that that's what people forget is you want people that have different viewpoints and different opinions of you so that you can find that optimal sweet spot somewhere in the middle. And so I felt really lucky that I had this team that they were not afraid to voice their opinion. And even if it was different, we kind of went back and forth until we found something we were all happy with. Some of the films we were on like rough cut 17 of to make a little 2.5-minute film, but we knew how important it was to have this very fine nuance in the final piece because like these are really activating topics in this moment. And so we wanted something that was going to be not divisive and not fueling the flames of this current climate, but actually something that created a peaceful place for people to come and reflect and have a slightly different viewpoint on these things that everybody's so heated about right now. And, another thing that we added was I worked with this composer, Virtual Perfection Cowboy, who I've worked with on a number of other projects. And he created this really beautiful ambient soundscape that actually uses like healing tones. Because I wanted this to be like a place where people can come and calm their nervous systems and think about these topics in a clear-headed, calm, and open way. And then also with the 8-screen installation, that was something that Ben Craw, my one editor, really took ownership of. I love immersive installations. I was really inspired by the 6-screen installation I'd seen back when I was in high school. So one of the things we did, you'll notice in the opening of that piece with the drone, nobody understood what I was doing. I was like, trust me, guys, this is going to work. We were in a farm in Kentucky. I had the drone operator take the drone from the center point and go out and back and forth in 8 different directions. So that way, when you stand in the center, it's almost like this vertigo effect, like you're standing in the center of a field in Kentucky and then all 8 screens are going outward and we cut between the different settings. We did the same techniques in all the different places because that was another thing I really wanted to play with was this idea of the things that are similar and yet different. So if you film something all in the same way, but it's all these different backdrops and landscapes and stuff, being able to compare and contrast that.
Were you sending back any dailies or perhaps weeklies at least to get an assembly before you wrapped, or did you just start everything once the production wrapped?
Yeah, we were sending weekly hard drives, which was always fun. Oh my God, there was one point where we were in Asheville, North Carolina, and it was 6 weeks after the hurricane had hit. And we were trying to rush to find a FedEx to ship back these drives before the end of the day. And we go to this FedEx on the map and it was just like...
underwater.
Exactly. It was just like, all right, I guess we're not shipping these drives out today. So yeah, we were shipping weekly and the editors at home were assembling them so that we'd be watching down the interviews. And then Philip, our sound guy, was also doing daily string outs as well. So that we'd have those to go through. And my story producers at home were watching those down, trying to pick out clips. And yeah, it was quite a production.
So speaking of the audio, one thing that really impressed me when I was walking around was how there were audio interviews emanating from certain portraits, and it really felt immersive. I mean, in Midtown Manhattan, with all the street sounds, it's hard to give somebody a sense of being immersed, but I found it really effective. Can you talk about how the portraits that included audio were placed so they didn't compete with each other or so that it would give you that sense of immersion?
Oh my God, that was so hard. I can't even tell you. So we worked with our sound designer, Brian Arnold, who is an amazing sound designer. And it was really a challenge trying to get the timing right. I actually think when you went, the timing probably still wasn't right. We had to do a few other versions after that. With the way the three docks are placed, I wanted those to be these landmark points so that they, like I said, sort of serve this three-act structure. There's that first film, The Promise, the second film's The Struggle, and then the third film's called Together. And it was important for me to, along the path, sort of build in this narrative that connected those pieces. There was so much great footage and so many interesting things that people said that didn't make it into the film. And so those still photos was a great moment to have these audio stories where you would see the subject and see them speaking about these different topics. The way that it's set up right now is that as you exit onto the path, you watch the first film, and if you keep a pretty nice pace, then they will go like one after the other and tell the story. And we wanted it to really drive the people along the path as they're walking, so that if you sat from the first film through all the audio stories to the end piece, it forms an entire narrative structure altogether.
Mm-hmm. And you sort of walk into the story as it's beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
It worked for me, even with the bus noises occasionally and whatever else was around. It didn't break my interest. It made me actually want to go closer.
Nice. That's really great to hear. Yeah, I mean, Hannah, Greg, and I were on site till like midnight some nights just trying to get that timing down, because it was really challenging because the things are looping. And so you had to really find this precise way that they're not speaking over each other. Because I really wanted this space to be like a sanctuary in New York City, because New York City, as we all know, is just so hectic and crazy. And the space and the land itself is so incredible. I mean, this is the biggest piece of undeveloped real estate in Manhattan. It's 3 square blocks and it's like wild. There's grass growing 4 feet high and all this stuff. And it's just such a beautiful, interesting space. And so I really wanted it to be almost like a diorama. You know, we're letting like all the greenery kind of grow in front of the photos so that it feels part of the photos. And that's worked really well. Making sure that you could hear the stories, but that they weren't speaking over each other and creating too much of a cacophony was really important. And then we also, like I said, we have those tones in between the stories so that we tried to create a little bit of a sound wall, because the FDR is right there and it's very noisy. So we wanted to block that a little bit with those whole tone sounds.
Yeah, anybody who's not from New York and is trying to picture it, like, you have to see where it is to really appreciate what you guys pulled off. And I like the visual immersion as well. Can you talk about what went into making sure that even the placement in regard to the background elements, you wanted to make sure those jived as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, it was such an interesting piece of land to me, because there's also like all these bedrocks. It's very wild. It's almost like a original piece of Manhattan. It goes to show you how much nature kind of can recuperate itself. It's not an even field at all. Like, there's these large stones and rock formations. And so luckily there's a lot of photos. There's one where our subject Ian Teller is sitting on a rock near a lake. And so I placed that so that at a certain angle, the rock he's sitting on almost extends to the rock in the background. It's actually my primary focus was to make sure that the visuals of the photos blended into the background as much as possible. Like I said, it's great because you have the grass and the wildness, and then this photo of a lake in Navajo Nation, and then the Empire State Building behind you. I love playing with those different layers of the city and the places we shot, and then the natural landscape.
Yeah, I think that's so important when you look at how we view images and how really all kind of content and art, that immersion aspect, whether you're looking at it on a phone or large scale, how it's lit, how it's set up, everything, all of that plays into how we receive what is being presented to us. Was there anything that surprised you or any insights that you had during this project that you learned from?
Everything. I mean, it's never easy. You know, as Scott says, it's never easy. And like, you have to stay in the middle too. You know, that's the thing. It's like you think you're going to get one thing and you don't, and you can't sort of get disappointed and let that mess up your next day. It's going to be good days and hard days. And you have to just leave the hard days where they are, start fresh every day, and there's no shortcuts, you know? I mean, that was the thing about the editing. Like, I always had this dream, like, I'll just give this footage to somebody and they'll like come back and it will be exactly what I want. Like, no, you have to sit there. And again, this is something Scott always says, like, you have to know your footage. You have to sit there. You have to watch the dailies. You have to know your footage better than anyone. It just takes time. You know, I didn't have a life for a year. It was 18 hours a day nonstop, but it's worth it in the end. You know, it's worth it to create something that is unique and special and hopefully inspires people.
Mhm. I'm interested for the portraits. Me, obviously, being a still photographer, that's something that I looked at. And I'm like, okay, environmental, but they're cohesive. From what I've seen, most everything is composed pretty much the same as far as how much of the frame is taken up with the portrait. Can you talk about the decisions that went into how you were photographing each subject?
Yeah, that was really my design team from C&G Partners. I worked with Alan Tokmakov, who was amazing in this. And he was the one, C&G, they conceptualized this space in terms of like, these are the structures we're going to have in this space. And he was the one that really pushed me to say, like, keep it so that everybody's this size. Because we did different modeling and we tried it with like, if there were close-ups, and we really wanted to avoid it feeling like these people were like giants in the space. We wanted them to feel life-size and that the landscape itself was life-size. And it was challenging for me because, you know, a lot of times like the types of photos I like to take are more close-up or medium shot. Actually, I have closer-up photos of them that I like better than the things that ended up in the project. But because we wanted to keep this visual consistency, we stuck with that framing. It was a challenge because when you create those constraints on yourself, sometimes you have to go against your sensibilities, but it worked better for the cohesiveness of the whole exhibit.
Interesting. You know, there was this sense of intention with all the images, but it's interesting to hear how much intention goes into that and how much, I mean, you have to know ultimately where it's going. It's like shooting for a magazine. Is it going to be a cover spread? Is there going to be text overlay? And I think those are always decisions that escape a lot of younger photographers or photographers who haven't worked on a large scale or in a commercial space, that this is all stuff that gets decided before the project is begun. And these are decisions that go into every step of executing the project.
Absolutely. And it was funny because like there were moments where I felt like, oh, this is limiting me creatively because I'd rather get the shot from this way or I'd rather have it be this type of shot. But like I had to kind of get over that. And in the end, Aline was right. It really worked best when it was those wider shots and we tried to incorporate the path. And this happens with film and editing too. You know, it's like sometimes you have to cut your favorite scenes or you have to cut your favorite photos because even though individually it works, it doesn't work within the whole of the piece. And you have to be willing to let that go.
What is something career-wise that both of you have learned throughout this project or projects of a similar scale as far as developing as a person, as a creative? Is there a takeaway that you come out of a project like this with a life lesson or with something that applies to your career of how you get better?
Yeah, I think this goes back to what Daniella said, being curious and just never losing that. You just got to leave room and allow things to happen sometimes. I know with this new AI thing, I feel like I'm back in school on some things, like learning new apps to control the lights and even the Ronins. Everything's app based these days. Everything. My cameras connect to my phone. I could see the image through my Komodo, through my phone. So trying to learn those new technical things and trying to apply it to what we're doing now. And I feel like I'm doing a lot more. So I'm just trying to be able to manage. I get lost into the technical thing and I'm using the wrong side of my brain. So I'm really trying to be aware of just not being so technical, be free from the gear and just let mistakes happen sometimes and then maneuver on that. But it's a revolving door, especially now. Technology is just moving so rapidly. So I don't know what the answer is. I'm just trying to stay center and just be open-minded. I keep coming back to that. Not be so pejorative on this whole AI thing and just have a little faith, I guess.
Keep that hope.
Yeah.
Well, and Daniella, for you, it's like, you know, a lot of your work, it's like when I look at your body of work, it's very filmic. It's very film heavy. moving into this space of, okay, now with technology and everything at our fingertips, and there's certain things about digital that make it way easier. Film still has that romantic appeal. It still has that process behind it. How are you handling all the technology going forward for somebody who you seem like an old soul, like you like the film vibe?
It's so funny because like I probably took over 10,000 photos on this project digital, and it's like, we got 30 that I'm kind of like, I would say like there's 3 I love, and then I have my rolls of film and I'm like, every one of those are a banger. Like I get back rolls of film, I'm like, that's great, that's great. I'm like, how does this even happen? And I realized so much of that is because of the approach, because film is an expensive medium when you have to sit there and wait to find the right moment. I think that that's something that is also just like a life lesson, learning that patience and learning to be present. And like what Scott was saying, when he says, don't get ahead of yourself, be present, be in the moment, stop thinking about what you think is going to be the outcome. Just like show up in the present moment and do the best you can in that moment. And then the next step will follow and the next step will follow, because it is easy to get ahead of ourselves. And I think that happens more rapidly with digital because you just click, 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 click. And then all of a sudden you're in post-production and you're going through 20,000 photos. And, there's something to be said about this, like patience and this presence in the moment and waiting. That's why I tend to like film better than digital.
Our last guest, actually, Mary Ellen, said that she used the 4x5 camera just for that purpose. It wasn't about quality, it was slowing down.
Slows you down, yeah.
And being intentional.
Absolutely.
It forces you to have a different perspective.
Well, I think when you go back and look at your images, it's exhausting mentally to think like, I have 20,000 images to go through, rather than I have 36 to look at.
Yeah. One of the things I had to do was go through the digital images the day of. And one of the things I really like about film is, especially if you're traveling with film, it might be a few days or even weeks before you get those negatives back. And you have time to digest it and you have time to get a different perspective on it. And you can see things through fresh eyes when you have that time. But when you're working on a commercial project or there's a client involved and stuff, you're not on your own time, you're on everyone else's time. So
that's a great point. And I think when you look at the difference between shooting on film and digital, when you shoot on film, when you go back, because look, everybody has that experience. I shot 36 frames and maybe one of them is okay. But at the time, what it took for you to press the shutter, you saw something or you felt something. And I think with digital, that's not necessarily true. It's more of it's free, so you know what? I might as well take this. Maybe I'll like it later, maybe I won't. And I think it's that intention with film that makes you really, even if you didn't nail the shot, if it didn't come out how you want. And I think that's why you can look at so many more of your images and say, you know what, these are bangers because the moment was a banger or what you felt was a banger. Whether the execution really delivered what you saw or what you felt at the time doesn't really matter as much as the reason that you pressed the shutter in the first place.
Absolutely. And a funny little anecdote. So I was just trekking in these mountains in Peru and I had my Olympus Ohm 10 and it was like the most beautiful light. We're like in these mountains and there's horses and the light was just hitting them so perfect. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to take this photo. It's going to be amazing. And then click, my shutter is not working and my camera stopped working. And I still have that image like burned into my brain. There's a collection I have of these images that I wanted to take and just didn't get to take for some reason. And so those are always there too.
Well, this was a wonderful conversation. I will remind everybody that Path of Liberty, That Which Unites Us, is on view until at least November 1st, 2025. So make sure to check the Path of Liberty website for updates and to reserve your free ticket. Danielle, we'll start with you. What other projects are you working on and where can we find more of your work?
Thank you. Yeah, right now I'm in South America. I'm working on my next project I'm writing. It's a narrative film, surrealist piece. Yeah, you can find all my work at Daniella Vale, Daniella, V as in Victor, ALE.com.
Wonderful. And Scott, what do you have on your plate?
You could find me at scottbeardslee.com, but I feel like no one goes to websites anymore. So I am jumping into the world of TikTok and
yes,
I have to embrace it. So I got involved in these vertical feature films. So I've been doing a lot of that, embracing those platforms. So my TikTok will be coming out. So it'll be something like Scott Beardslee, my first name. So, I don't know. I'm learning. I'm going with it. So
you're a step ahead of me, man. I'm still not there. People send me TikTok links and I can't see them.
Like I said, I'm working with a lot of the younger generation, and I'm just curious, and I'm learning more from them than they're learning from me. So, and this is my third act in my career. Being in the union for almost 20 years now, and coming from the lighting department and being a DP, I have another 5 more years. So I feel like you got to learn from the kids. So I'm going for it.
There you go. The rebirth. He's starting act 1 of the TikTok years.
Yes.
Inspiring.
This was great. Yes, definitely a conversation that inspires hope, a project that inspires hope, and really just fun to talk to you guys. So huge thank you to you guys for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Totally an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. No, pleasure was all ours. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you as well for joining us today. If you are a fan of the show but are not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, B&H's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog, where we post photos from our guests along with our show notes. And if you're on Facebook, not TikTok, Facebook, you can check out the B&H Photography Podcast group, where you can share your favorite photos and comment about the show. I am your host, Derek Fosbender. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein, and our executive producer is Richard Stevens. On behalf of us all, thank you so much for tuning in today.